So hi everyone, today we're here with Professor Q for our third interview on the Redstone. And joining us as a guest interviewer is Eugene Ho, student advisor for the Redstone and previous president of the Philosophy Interest Group at NUS. So Prof Q is the Dean's Chair Associate Professor at the Department of Philosophy in NUS and a specialist in early modern philosophy, especially in Hume and Kant. Prof Q's monograph on Hume has also just been published last year by Oxford University Press. And so today we hope to hear some stories from both his professional and personal lives. So Q, our first question is why philosophy and why Hume?
Why philosophy and why Hume? I think my path to philosophy wasn't straightforward, which I think is quite common for a lot of people, young people, especially young people from this part of the world, right? Also Malaysia, but I think a lot of the same lessons hold true. Our exposure to philosophy is non-existent pretty much, right? I think you guys get to do some KI sometimes. But yeah, in essence, we don't really know what philosophy is about. So it's kind of a bit of a crapshoot how we get exposed to philosophy and how much we enjoy it. For me, I actually intended to do economics, but I thought that doing straight economics might be a bit tedious after 3 years. So I applied for PPE instead because it sounded fun. And the philosophy, doing the philosophy there, I realized I was more passionate about it than the actual economics. Trying to convince my parents that I was going to pursue a degree in philosophy was maybe a challenge, but I guess it's also a challenge that a lot of students at NUS maybe sympathize with. I think my favorite story about this is I was helping out at an open house at NUS, and there was this there was a booth with like philosophy on top, and I was manning the booth, I think myself at the time. And this young lady saw the philosophy booth and she was with her mother, and she told her mother that she was going to check it out. And the mother couldn't see very clearly, and maybe she thought it says like psychology or something. So she was just like walking towards it like this. And then there came a moment where she realized that it said philosophy, and she just dragged her daughter away. So but yeah, basically I did philosophy and I learned I enjoyed it, which I think is how a lot of students here get into it as well. They take the exposure module, I think run usually by Loy and Mike, and they run it very well. And they, students find out that, hey, philosophy is really fun, and they do more of it, right? And how much you do of it is really up to them. I'm not expecting everyone to do a PhD or even a master's or even a major, right? Or even a minor. But it's fun, and take some classes in it, and manage your exposure as you like. How Hume? I guess that's another question. I studied under Peter Millikan when I was at Oxford. So he was doing most of the tutoring for my philosophy courses, and I guess hearing him be so passionate about Hume kind of set something off in me. And I think for a while, when I decided to specialize in philosophy, I didn't want to do Hume because I thought it'd be a bit cliche to do the same thing as your supervisor. But after a while, I realized that I really enjoyed Hume, and it would be kind of silly to not do Hume just out of desire to avoid cliche. So I think what I like about the history of philosophy is that nowadays, like, philosophy gets a lot more specialized, which is understandable. You have really excellent, really detailed work being done on sort of smaller parts of the bigger picture. But back in the day, that wasn't the case. Kant did everything, Hume did everything, Aristotle did everything. And part of, I think, the joy of the history of philosophy is seeing how these sort of big systems hang together. We're not just looking at one small problem, but you're looking at, a whole system, right, of metaethics, of metaphysics, of epistemology, of aesthetics, of whatever, all that hang together in this beautiful way. It's a very aesthetic enjoyment. So that's why I enjoy the history of philosophy and Hume in particular.
Nice. Okay. So when I first audited your critique of pure reason class, I remember I asked you about what other modules you taught other than Kant. And then you told me, well, I teach Hume and Kant, and I teach Hume, and of course I teach Kant. And also, I sometimes teach founders of modern philosophy, right? But Hume and Kant is your bread and butter, right? So we've heard from you about why Hume. So I suppose the next question is why Kant?
Why can't I? What? Sorry, no, that's a joke. No, why can't? I think, if you're looking at two of the most systematic philosophers in the history of philosophy, I think Hume and Kant would definitely be up there, like in your list. And a lot of the reasons I'm attracted to Hume are the same reasons I'm attracted to Kant. He's got this like hugely systematic, hugely like beautiful project. I think Kant's project is more systematic, but also more difficult. And in my opinion, more wrong. But it's nevertheless beautiful for it. So I do really enjoy studying Kant. I think there's some linguistic problems with me studying Kant too seriously because I don't speak German. So I think if you want to be a really serious Kant scholar, it's hard to do so without knowing German. I've recently published a paper on Hume and Kant that I'm quite proud of. The Kant part took about like 10 times as long to write as the Hume parts for me. But yeah, I think Kant is definitely up there. Two of my favorite philosophers are Hume and Kant.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question about whether you thought Kant answered Hume's challenge about the proving the validity of the causal maxim, but I think you already mentioned that you thought that Kant was a bit more wrong, so maybe that's a bit of a hint of an answer.
Well, actually, I have a very sympathetic paper to Kant. The paper I mentioned just coming out as should be this or next year, where I argue that there's a way of looking at it. I mean, like answer is kind of a ambiguous sort of like what constitutes an answer. If you ask me, if you say, yeah, if you state something and I just say, well, that's wrong, have I answered you, right? So I need to engage with your project to a certain degree to properly answer you, right? I can't just deny your conclusion. But how many of your assumptions do I have to share? If I just deny all of your assumptions, is that answering you? I mean, so that's sort of like a degree of vagueness here. But I argued that there is a sort of way of looking at it where, Kant does take on a lot of Hume's assumptions on board and offers a solution. It's a solution that Hume rejects, as you would expect, right? But nevertheless, he offers a solution, and to the extent to which that can be said to be an answer, I think, there's a reading of which Kant does answer Hume. Again, Hume wouldn't agree with it, and Kant wouldn't agree if Hume's not agreeing with it, but that's philosophy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that I guess at least one of the first reasons why you got into Hume is because of the passion that your supervisor, I guess, taught you. And now that you are, you've also stepped up as the head of the Department of Philosophy, I was just wondering, like, what are your pedagogical beliefs and how do you carry yourself as an educator, especially in Singapore, where as you said, philosophy doesn't have a great name in households?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, part of being head is a reduction in my teaching load. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do both the teaching and the headship. So, but definitely, like I do prefer the teaching to the headship. All to truth be told. So I'm looking forward to the day in which I can relinquish the headship and continue teaching full time, as it were. Yeah, I think for me, I teach mainly the history of philosophy, and part of that is preference, as you alluded to, and part of it is also necessity because our department doesn't have, it's maybe heavily weighted and with a lot of strength in some areas, such as epistemology and philosophy of math, and maybe it's got less strength in the historical sort of side of things. So when I do teach, it tends to have to be the history of philosophy. Yeah, so like because I teach the history of philosophy, I find my goal in every class is sort of to get the class to see the beauty of the history of philosophy in the way that I do. A lot of that is going to involve going to the real nitty-gritty of the system, right? You have to understand how everything hangs together, as I mentioned earlier. So it is, and my classes tend to be quite intense. I guess Eugene might agree or disagree with me there. But my classes tend to be quite intense. They tend to really get into the weeds. And it's not so much because I think you need to know, why exactly the first analogy works. When you leave the university, I don't think you need to know that per se, but I think that knowing that and knowing how it hangs together, the rest of it is important to understand what's beautiful, what's great about the history of philosophy. So I think my goal in every class is to make sure the students sort of come out of it with at least some of that appreciation of why I like the history of philosophy. They might disagree in the end, but I hope they can at least see that point of view.
Cool. Okay. So it was described to me once that Prof Q has the early modern mafia behind him. So you studied under.
Are you worried?
I mean, you studied under Peter Millikan in Oxford, right? And then under Don Garrett at NYU. And also Beatrice Longness was in your dissertation committee, right? So these giants in early modern philosophy. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about perhaps the difference in the culture in Oxford and NYU. Maybe what it was like studying in simulation, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting for sure. So like in Oxford, Oxford and Cambridge are a very unique system. It's a tutorial system, and their tutorials aren't like our tutorials, it's like 20 students. Their tutorials are like 2-to-1 mainly. A lot of my philosophy tutorials are 1-to-1. So it's really intense, right? You sort of write a paper, usually about 2,500 words. By the way, this has sort of made me a unsympathetic pedagogue because we were writing about 5,000 words every week. So when students complain about essays, I'm like, I understand now that you guys have a lot more going on besides, but like at the same time, we were writing about 5,000 words every week. So I'm sort of used to sort of the crucible sort of style of education. So yeah, you write about 5,000 words every week, 2,005 per essay, and you sit 1-on-1 or 2-on-1 with an expert in the field, and they sort of grill you on your paper. So it's really intense, right? Really enjoyable. I highly recommend it, or something like it. But certainly it was very intense. And I guess like yeah, so that was my experience at Oxford. When I did a PhD at NYU, it was maybe a bit. I guess like NYU is, I guess, more organized in a way. Like Oxford is more sprawled out, and NYU is more organized in the way they sort of bring students through the program. So they're more like, it felt more like stepwise in a way. But I guess once you get to a PhD level, it's also quite similar. You work 1-on-1. So the culture differences weren't huge in terms of the way I studied. In terms of where I'm living, I think Oxford and New York are probably two of the most different places you can imagine. And I think being, as a Malaysian, I think living abroad for the first time in Oxford, I was really homesick. And when I was in New York, so I got together with my now wife, but then girlfriend, right before I left Oxford, and she took out a scholarship with PUB, right? So we decided to do long distance, but so my time out in New York was also a bit difficult because of this long distance relationship. Thankfully, I was lucky enough to get a job at NUS and curtail the long distance aspect of it. But yeah, I guess there were difficulties with both.
On that note, I was just curious, like, how do you manage your personal life and being a philosophy academic? Yeah, you mentioned, sorry, like I'm sorry if I caught it wrongly, but your wife took a scholarship with PUB in Singapore, so
Yeah.
she's a Singaporean.
Yes, I'm a Singaporean now. Actually, I converted a few years ago, so I'm now fully fledged Singaporean. Yeah, how to balance personal life? I think this is something I've been thinking about more. I've just had a little girl, my first child, in January. So work-life balance is sort of important. I think when I was in New York, when I was doing my PhD, I tended to work the whole day, which could be a bit unhealthy. I had a motivation on to finish my PhD as fast as possible, so I could sort of end the long distance aspect of the long distance relationship. But I think once I got a job here, I think I've tried to be quite disciplined about not working in the evenings and at the weekends. I think I know some people work all the time, and if it works for them, that's great. But also, I think for me personally, I think when you get to a point where you're not really accomplishing that much more with the amount of time you're putting in, and you might as well just recharge and spend your time doing something that you enjoy or with people whose company you enjoy, and then sort of working more intensely in the time that you do have. So I try to be quite disciplined about not working weeknights and weekends, and I think those academics were lucky because our work system is quite flexible. As long as you sort of write the papers and teach classes, so I think there's no need for you to be there at a certain time on a stay OT or whatever. So I think I'm in a fortunate position.
Would you encourage your daughter to enter philosophy?
I think she should do whatever she ends up enjoying. And given how much there is open to, a young person, specifically I doubt it'd be philosophy. If she wants to do philosophy, that's great. So if she does it, that's also fine. I think I will sort of talk a lot of philosophy to her as she's growing up. Not because I want her to pursue philosophy, but because I think philosophy is fun. And also philosophy is useful, right? It gets you to think about things you wouldn't normally think about. And I think, for a lot of our students here in US and for myself, philosophy is really an eye-opening way of approaching the world. You sort of see the world through new light once you study some philosophy, which sounds like exaggeration, and maybe it is, but not by as much as you might think. So yeah, I will talk to her about philosophy, and if she wants to do philosophy, great. If not, also great, probably better. As you guys know, the philosophy sort of academic market is pretty miserable right now. Has been for the last 20 years or 15 years. Foreseeable future probably will continue to be. So yeah.
I was just curious, since yourself as a Malaysian who spent a lot of time in the US and the UK, and I guess now that maybe I see you've started thinking about what might happen for your children in philosophy. Just wanted to gather your thoughts about where you think philosophy is both as a job and as a field of study is heading into, especially for, with new talks about diversity and inclusion. Just curious about what your thoughts are in these domains.
Oh, so that's a lot of territory. So I think in terms economically where the field is going, I think there's definitely been a lot of cuts. I think the humanities in general have seen a lot of cuts, especially in the US. It's not quite counterbalanced by the growth of the humanities in Asia. I think China, Singapore, Hong Kong, all of them are expanding or building upon our liberal arts and humanities programs. I think Yale NUS is a great testament to this in Singapore. So yeah, I think we'll sort of see a dimming of philosophy just funding wise in the US and maybe Europe, and maybe more increased emphasis on Asia. I don't foresee either trend being reversed anytime soon. I think if our department continue to hire during the COVID pandemic, and many other Asian departments continue to hire too. I think meanwhile, I think the US jobs were about a third or a fifth of their usual amount. So I think, given that the Asian universities were committed to continuing to expand the humanities program during COVID of all times, I think it's safe to say that this is not something they're going to be shaken off easily, which is great. About diversity and inclusion, I think philosophy can be a very white, very male place. Certainly, I find when I go to conferences and people there are great, and it's not anything that anyone does, but there is a part of me that feels a bit uncomfortable. Just no one there looks like, or very few people there look like me, right? Very few people there are of my demographic, and that sort of plays a role, right? I think Yeah, so philosophy has been very white and very male. I think closer to home, I think our department is trying to hire more women quite actively. And, I think we hired Lavinia last year, and we'll hire Moon Young Song is joining us the following year. So, we're hoping to continue to build on that in future years. I do think it's important, obviously. And my own experience is that, it can be alienating. I think when I was in Oxford, actually, I had this professor who's quite famous. You probably would have heard of him, but names omitted to protect the guilty, I suppose. And I was doing a tutorial with him when also my B.Phil. And I wrote this long paper on meta-ethics, and he, after half an hour, no, I showed up the paper, and he said he spent half an hour sort of taking me a task over splitting my infinitives or like confusing which and that, right? Sort of. By the way, splitting infinitives isn't actually like a thing. It's from Latin, where you can't split an infinitive, whereas in English you can. But anyway, that's a separate issue. But after sort of half an hour of taking me a task over those and not mentioning the philosophical content at all, he said, "I know English isn't your first language, but you really have to do better." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, English is my first language." And we just had this sort of like really awkward 3 minutes where we just stared at each other, and he was like, "Okay," and then he moved on. But yeah, there are sort of situations like that, which, even the people aren't necessarily ill-meaning. I think they can contribute to a sort of feeling of alienation. So yeah, I think that's definitely a big problem, and it's good that there's getting more recognition and more concrete steps are being taken to address it now. I mean, Hume himself, he wrote some very racist things. I actually am writing a paper now about Hume's racism and his bigotry and some of his essays. And I think, there's more attention being paid to that sort of thing now, which is important. I mean, I don't think we should cancel Hume, right? Kant as well was said some notoriously racist things. I think it's important to recognize, not whitewash, what they said, sort of recognize it in the context of their work and so forth. So yeah, I think positive development.
Well, since we're on the topic of diversity, I recall that when I took Founders of Modern Philosophy under you, you often mentioned some female thinkers like Elizabeth of Bohemia and Margaret Cavendish, who engaged in the debates of the early one period. I suppose there's a historical concern, right? Like, how much of a role do you think these women played in shaping the thought of early modern philosophy, and whether you think there are any thinkers in particular who might deserve more attention?
But yeah, that's a great question. I think, as it turns out, these thinkers, just historically, right, didn't play a very huge role in shaping philosophy. But that's because, as a woman, right, I think it's hard to have your ideas be taken seriously. And I think a lot of the female thinkers there had experienced these sort of discriminations and problems. So part of our job as historians of philosophy is to recognize the influential thinkers of the time, but part of it is also to correct, and rectify for the sort of thinkers who might have been unfairly overlooked. So I think that's part of what people are trying to do now, with more work on a few more thinkers in the early modern period in particular. Yes, I think Lady Mary Sheperd is someone I think is, she came quite a bit after Hume, actually, although she criticized Hume. I've been reading her work, and it's been very interesting to me. I tried to write a paper on it, but I sort of put it to one side because I didn't know enough and other things got in the way. But it might be something I revisit in the future. You mentioned Margaret Cavendish, I think, whose metaphysics is really interesting. Mary Wallace Docraft, Princess Elizabeth. There are a lot of fine, great female thinkers of the day that weren't appropriately recognized, and I think it's incumbent on us, our jobs, to recognize them more today.
I was just curious then, like what are your hopes, I guess, for philosophy, both in NUS and I guess on a global scale, especially now that you are the head of department, but that also in the long term that you will continue to be, I guess, a teacher of philosophy to young people.
Well, good. My long-term hope for philosophy is it doesn't die. I think I'm setting my expectations fairly low. But like I said, I think philosophy and the humanities have been under attack in the US and so forth. So I think, yeah, it's Europe is more of a culture of philosophy that sort of students study it in high school and so forth. So I don't see philosophy as dying there per se, but suddenly you see very worrying news about programs being cut in the US. So, but like I said, and things are picking up in Asia. So I guess it's always a bit cyclical. For departments, I think we're very lucky to have a very young and vibrant and talented department. A lot of professors are, sort of tenure track, and a lot of them are under 40. A lot of them are producing some, extremely good work. We've hired, I like to think we've hired some of the best people on the market every year for the last 6-7 years. So yeah, I think we are slowly but surely growing, both in terms of numbers and stature. So I'm optimistic about any philosophy in the US as well. Hopefully you get a continued trajectory and not waste sort of good work we've been building up. But yeah.
I was also curious about your thoughts, I guess, on interdisciplinary learning. For example, the new up-and-coming College of Humanities and College of Humanities and Sciences. I was wondering, what do you think that means for NUS philosophy in general?
Good. I think for me, when I think interdisciplinary, I think philosophy. There's a sense in which almost every discipline started from philosophy, right? Math was philosophy, chemistry was philosophy, as those fields got developed, they split into their own fields, right? But certainly, when you're looking to link different fields, I think they sort of trace back to very similar place where we're questioning our fundamental assumptions. So yeah, I think when it comes to interdisciplinarity, I am biased here, but I see philosophy as being a crucial pivot, right? You can sort of put philosophy of anything, right? And there's philosophy of economics, there's philosophy of chemistry, there's philosophy of biology, there's philosophy of math, there's philosophy of logic, and that's for the reasons I said earlier. And you can also use philosophy to link, different areas, what shared assumptions, methodological assumptions do biology, chemistry, and physics share, and to what extent is it similar with the sciences, with the social sciences, right? So there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot I think philosophy can do for such a interdisciplinary sort of model of pedagogy. So hopefully philosophy will play a big role in it going forward. We'll see.
How do you think you would, I guess, consciously tweak any of your teachings in the history of philosophy if given the chance? I think you were talking about how you were attracted to Hume and Kant and early modern because of how, I guess, more holistic those forms of thought were as compared to how much more specialized these fields are today. Yeah. So just wondering whether that has any implications on how you will conduct your classes in future.
Me personally, I'm always trying to tweak the classes from year to year, depending on what works, what doesn't work. Generally, I tend not to tweak it too much, but I do try to make some small tweaks here and there, and I look at student feedback and so forth. I don't think there's anything like I'm setting out to change, so to speak. I'm sort of just seeing what works and what doesn't in the context of the class.
Okay, so this might be a bit of a segue, but while preparing for this interview, I actually listened to some of your philosophy raps, the one you put on your website.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and in 99 Problems but truth makers ain't one. I was surprised to find that you seem sympathetic to Lewisian modal realism. And maybe you already gestured to an answer there, right? But I was wondering whether you were or still are a Lewisian modal realist, and how does someone, like as a Humean, reconcile empiricism with belief in concrete possible worlds?
Right, good. I'm not sure I'll describe myself as a Lewisian, so I wouldn't say I drank the Kool-Aid. I do really admire the Lewisian project in the same way I really admire the Kant's project or Hume's project, which is that I think Lewis and Rawls are some of the exceptions in recent times to what I talk about how philosophy tends to focus more on the details, or at least professional philosophy. I think, Lewis crafted this amazingly beautiful system, right? And the system's beautiful, and if all it costs is believing in concrete possible worlds, I don't know. I'm not sure I believe in concrete possible worlds, but like I see the appeal of it, right? So I do have a great admiration for Lewis and the Lewisian project. But yeah, in the same way, I also admire Kant's project, and I appreciate that a lot of it is perhaps inconsistent with sort of the Humean sort of outset. And I'm biased, but I do think Hume was probably one of the most correct of the three of them. But I think there's beauty in the other systems. So.
Yeah, we noticed that you enjoy dance and rap. We're just wondering, what do you do in your free time?
Well, I'm not sure I rap is something that I do. I did it for a talent show in NYU. The grad program had a talent show, and that's when I wrote 99 Problems for Truth Makers into one. I do dance in my spare time. So my wife and I we met doing ballroom dancing at Oxford. We were fierce competitors. Well, we weren't dancing with each other. We were dancing with different people. Her partner ended up being my best man at the wedding, actually. So, but yeah, so we were competitors, and I mean, I'm not gonna be around the bush. My wife is a much better dancer than I have. She's been dancing since she was young. But nevertheless, I'll never let her forget that in the last big ballroom competition at Oxford, when we went to Blackpool, I managed to beat her by 1 point, which is one of the only times I managed to beat her. Now we're doing West Coast Swing, which is a lot less prescribed than ballroom. Ballroom, you have usually, competitive ballroom, you have a fixed partner and you have a fixed choreography. West Coast Swing is, social dance, so you switch partners and you don't know what music is going to come on. You don't know what partner you're going to dance with, and you just sort of figure out together with your partner on the dance floor. And there's something about that spontaneity that I really enjoy. There's something about that getting together and creating something on the spot, sort of responding to each other, listening to each other's cues, and sort of working off that. That's something I really enjoy about West Coast Swing. So, I think we've been doing it for about 3.5 years now, and hopefully we'll continue doing it. Now we're doing it slightly less now that we have a third member of our family, but we're hoping to get her involved as well when she's older, and we're hoping to continue to dance too.
So what are your other hobbies or interests?
Well, my other hobbies and interests. I think some of us at the philosophy department tend to play some board games. So sometimes some of us get together and play some board games. Some people enjoy playing different kinds of games. I like very intense Euro games, sort of the ones that take like 2 to 3 hours to play. Although that does take up a lot of energy. I think so there's a lot of people in the department enjoy chess. So a lot of us enjoy board games. That's another thing I enjoy. It's boring. I like watching TV, I guess. Something I'll be doing more of during the lockdown. I think we're lucky to be in a position where there's so much good television and not enough time to watch it these days. So that's something as well. But honestly, mostly I do. Most of my free time is probably spent dancing, or at least was until the little one came along. But yeah.
I was wondering if you have anything you would say to For instance, an incoming freshman deciding what to study and is interested in philosophy, but doesn't really know what it's about. Just
Right.
hears all these things.
I mean, philosophy fundamentally I see as questioning our fundamental assumptions. I think there's a bit of trying to sort of fix the ship while you're on it if you sort of try to question the assumptions while you're depending on them in real life. And I think the nice thing about philosophy is it allows you to sort of remove yourself away from that situation where you have to rely on those assumptions and sort of question them sort of in a safe space, right? So I think for anyone who's interested in sort of systematic abstract thinking, I think philosophy is going to be for you. I'll say in general, my advice to any incoming student, whether interested in philosophy or not, is just to do what you find interesting. I think you're in a really fortunate position when you're in university to be able to dedicate, 4 years now, I think it has to be 4 years to just studying what hopefully you enjoy, right? And it's such a shame to waste that doing something that you're not passionate about, that you find a burden, that you find a chore. I mean, there's really almost no other period in your life where you have the freedom to just explore and to learn and to do what tickles your fancy. I think once you're working, once you have a family, it's been, you might say to yourself, yeah, I'll read up more when, I find a job and so forth. But it never works out that way, life has a way of getting in the way. So yeah, you're in a really lucky, fortunate position to have these years ahead of you to just learn and enjoy learning. So make sure whatever you're doing, you enjoy, right? I think it's a shame and a waste otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. How would you say philosophy has shaped you as a person and will continue to, shape the different roles and hats you will continue to wear? Like a teacher, father.
I think philosophy has probably made me an annoying interlocutor at times. I think sometimes you struggle to turn off your philosophy, to put away your philosophy hat. When people are trying to have an ordinary conversation with you, you sort of overanalyze your assumptions and presumptions. I try to be good about taking that off, but it's just not always easy. So yeah, it can make you a more interesting dinner party guest. It can also make you a more annoying dinner party guest. So it's about striking the balance between the two of those. But yeah, I think, and I think this is true for all you students who study philosophy as well. I think having done philosophy, you really do see everything that comes in a new light, right? You sort of find yourself questioning or exploring or sort of niggling at things that you wouldn't have before. And I think that stays with you. It stayed with me, and I think it'll stay with both of you and the listeners out there who have studied philosophy. I think it'll stay with them through the rest of life, and let it stay with you. I think that there might be a temptation to think, oh, why am I still thinking about this? Sort of try to shut it down. But I think there's real value in that. So yeah, don't shut it down. Sort of keep that little worm niggling at the base of your brain.
It might be a bit of an abstract question, but what do you think is the value of a university education, and what kind of considerations would someone have for or ought someone to have in pursuing further studies, I guess?
Great. Yeah, I think there was a time in the past when a lot of education was just about learning actual content, right? And of course, that's still true of, if you're a doctor, you better know what's in the medical books, right? I'd hope. If you're a dentist, you better, there's a lot of content here. If you're an engineer or whatever. So it's true of a lot of fields, but it's also a lot less true of a lot of different jobs. I think there are two reasons for this. One is that everything is changing so rapidly anyway, right? Technology is progressing and paradigms are changing. That learning something that might be outmoded in 10 years or seems to, that's not what you're here to do, right? I mean, it might be what you do, but it might not be the reason, your purpose here. The other reason is that a lot of information is just very freely available right now, with the internet. If you want to learn any given content, with a bit of hard work and a couple of weeks, you could probably become quite knowledgeable about it. If you previously had no knowledge and just purely, you rely on nothing more than your internet connection yourself. So I think the way things work now is for university education for most people, not doctors and engineers, but for most people, the value of university degree isn't so much the content of what you learn, right? It's about the way in which it shapes your learning, right? The way in which it makes you a more critical thinker, the way in which it makes you a more systematic thinker, the way in which it, yeah, all of these things, which is why I think like, sometimes people sort of say philosophy is not very useful and job-wise, and I disagree. I think when it comes to sort of developing the sort of skill sets that you're going to need, I think philosophy is going to be very important to you. Sure, you won't be relying on Kant or Aristotle in your job, but you won't be relying on I don't know, a theory of culture or thermodynamics in your job either, right? I mean, most of what you learn isn't going to be directly applicable. It's not about what you learn, it's about how you learn. And I think philosophy is great for that, right? Philosophy is like, I think of it as mental gym, sort of when you go to gym and you sort of I don't know, I don't go to gym much, as you can tell, but like, when people do the weights or whatever, they're not literally doing those same motions in real life, right? But nevertheless, sort of practicing those very prescribed, artificial, some might say, motions sort of strengthens your muscles in a way that makes it useful when you need to pick up a couch or when you need to move furniture. Similarly, I think, sure, you're not going to be studying the ontology or causation in real life, but the things you learn while doing that, I think, are going to translate and strengthen your mental muscles for when you need them for other things too. Yeah.
You mentioned that you thought that Hume was more right than most. I was wondering if there was something that Hume said that you thought was pretty wrong, or would you disagree? Yeah.
Something that Hume said was pretty wrong. Something that Hume said was pretty. Well, I think
I guess the question is would you defend everything he said in the treatise or something?
Well, definitely not. Right. In fact, that actually my recent book has argued that Hume gets a lot of things wrong in his epistemology in treatise, and he sort of fixes it in the inquiry. Of course, then you might say, well, do you agree with everything Hume said in the inquiry? Well, I think Hume has it right more than most, but I think no one has it all right? I think Hume was a thinker of his day, and he made a lot of the same mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes in his own way. As we do in ours. So no, I wouldn't say that I would agree with everything Hume said. Certainly not, socially, and certainly not philosophically. But I think the general sort of framework and the system and the idea, I think, is on the right path.
Maybe just to tie it all up and to go back to where we started, maybe as a final question, like, what do you think is the value of studying Hume today? And how should we go about studying Hume? I mean, I just like you mentioned, we shouldn't cancel Hume, and also
Right.
about how philosophy, I guess, has more of an edge as a field of study, because it helps you see the underlying patterns in a world that changes so rapidly, but also doesn't really change all that much. Yeah. So just like the value of studying Hume today.
Good. Yeah, Hume is an interesting case because Hume has sort of been adopted more by contemporary sort of philosophers than most, right? I always say that when you call something Humean, it's sort of a mark in his favor, right? The Humean theory of natural laws or whatever, it sounds good. When you call something Cartesian, that sounds bad, right? Just oh, that's a Cartesian mode of reasoning. That doesn't sound so good. So just in terms of sort of how the field has evolved, Hume certainly is pretty much one of the most respected, alongside Kant and some others. But I think there's also a bit of a worry in that, and we sort of start to quote like sort of bits and pieces of Hume without seeing the whole picture. And I think the whole picture is part of what makes studying Hume very appealing. So I would think that the way we study Hume, although like, bits and pieces like his theory of induction or his meta-ethics can be important for a lot of contemporary fields. When you study Hume, it's also important not just to look at Hume in terms of his relevance to these particular problems in contemporary philosophy, but also just look at Hume as a whole, holistically as a system. So I think that's an important way to study Hume. I think that's where a lot of his value lies.
Yeah. Do you have any final parting words for anyone who might watch this video?
Well, to all two of you, yeah, I mean, obviously you're very passionate about philosophy, otherwise you wouldn't be watching a 50-minute interview with me, of all people. But yeah, keep the passion, and yeah, I think there's a bit of preaching to the choir, given how obviously interested you'll be given it here, but yeah, philosophy is a really cool thing, and even if you're not actively studying it in the years to come, I think you'll sort of see the market mix in you. I think recognize it and don't like shunt away your degree, but sort of like keep it at the forefront, or sort of bring it out from time to time just to remind yourself and to polish it a bit.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.